At 11:47 on a Tuesday night, a billionaire burst through the emergency room doors carrying a bleeding woman in his arms. His $400 shirt was soaked in her blood. His hands were shaking. He screamed at every nurse in sight to save her life. But here is what he did not know. 20 feet away, behind a thin hospital curtain, his pregnant wife was lying in a hospital bed, alone, hooked to monitors. Her blood pressure so dangerously high that doctors were preparing to deliver her baby 8 weeks early. She heard him before she saw him. She recognized his voice, the same voice that had whispered, "I love you," that morning, the same voice now screaming another woman's name. And when that curtain opened and their eyes met across that emergency room, she saw everything. The blood on his shirt, the woman on the gurney, the 6 years of lies written across his face in a single, devastating second. What she did next shocked everyone in that hospital. But what she discovered 3 weeks later about why he was really with that woman, that is the part of this story that will keep you up tonight. This story carries a lesson that every woman needs to hear and no one teaches you. The opposite of betrayal is not revenge. It is rebuilding. It is the moment you stop asking, "How could he do this to me?" and start asking, "What am I going to do for myself?" Your worth was never defined by someone who chose not to see it. If this message resonates with you, leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to rebuild your life from something you never saw coming? Hit that like button if you believe every woman deserves to know her own strength. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you are new here, subscribe and to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might change how you see yourself. Now, let this story begin.
The automatic doors of Greenwich Hospital exploded open at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and Grant Mitchell came through them like a man outrunning something that had already caught him. He was carrying a woman in his arms. She was unconscious, her head tilted back at an angle that made the nurses at the triage desk stand up immediately. Blood ran from a gash above her left eyebrow, trailing down her temple and into her blonde hair, and it had soaked through the shoulder of Grant's $400 dress shirt so thoroughly that the fabric clung to his skin like a second layer. "She fell!" he shouted, his voice breaking across the sterile white waiting room. "She hit her head on the bathroom counter. She was conscious for a minute, and then she passed out. Someone help her. Someone help her right now." 2 nurses rushed forward with a gurney. A resident appeared from behind the triage station, already pulling on gloves. They took the woman from his arms with practiced efficiency, and Grant stood there in the fluorescent light, his hands still extended, his chest heaving, blood on his skin that was not his own. The woman on the gurney was beautiful, even in crisis. She wore a silk robe that had fallen open to reveal a black slip dress underneath. Her shoes were missing. Her makeup was smeared, but still visible, the kind of precise, expensive face that does not happen by accident. She looked like she had been interrupted in the middle of something private. The nurses wheeled her through the double doors into the treatment area. Grant followed, his expensive shoes leaving faint red prints on the polished floor. A nurse stopped him with a firm hand on his chest. "Sir, we need you to wait here while we assess her. Are you her husband?" Grant hesitated. It was a small hesitation, barely half a second, but it contained an entire confession. "No," he said, "I'm not her husband." "What is your relationship to the patient?" Another hesitation. She's a close friend." The nurse's expression did not change. She had worked emergency rooms for 19 years. She knew exactly what close friend meant when a man showed up at midnight covered in a woman's blood and wearing a wedding ring that did not match the woman on the gurney. "We'll update you shortly. Please have a seat." Grant did not sit. He stood in the center of the treatment area hallway, running both hands through his hair, pacing 3 steps in one direction and 3 steps back. He looked like a man performing a calculation and not liking the answer. That was when the curtain in Bay 3 pulled open. A nurse stepped out, adjusting an IV line, and for 2 seconds the curtain was wide open, and there in the hospital bed, wearing a pale blue gown with monitors attached to her chest and an IV drip running into her left arm, was Caroline Mitchell, his wife, 7 months pregnant, alone. Their eyes met across 20 feet of hospital corridor, and the world stopped making sound. The monitors beeped, but neither of them heard it. The nurse said something, but neither of them registered it. There was only this: a man standing between two rooms, blood on his shirt, from a woman who was not his wife, and his pregnant wife staring at him from a hospital bed where she had been admitted alone, without his knowledge, because her blood pressure had been dangerously high for weeks from the stress of living with his lies. Caroline looked at him. She looked at the blood on his shirt. She looked at the direction they had taken the other woman. And her face did something he had never seen before in 6 years of marriage. It went completely still. Not angry, not hurt. Still the way a lake goes still before a storm arrives. Grant opened his mouth. "Carrie, Don't," she said. Just the one word, quiet as a door closing. But to understand how Caroline Mitchell ended up staring at the complete destruction of her marriage under fluorescent hospital lights, we need to go back exactly 47 days. Jumped. 47 days earlier, the Mitchell estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, looked the way it always looked in early October. The maple trees along the driveway had turned the particular shade of gold that real estate photographers dream about. The hydrangeas Caroline had planted the first spring after they moved in were fading into their autumn colors, soft blues turning to dusty purple. The house itself was a 6-bedroom colonial that Grant's architect had designed to look like old money, even though it had been built only 8 years ago. Caroline stood in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, barefoot on the heated stone floor, making coffee in the French press because the espresso machine Grant had bought was too complicated and she had never learned to use it. She was 5.5 months pregnant, and the baby was active this morning, nudging and shifting as she moved around the kitchen. She loved this time of day. The house was quiet. Grant had already left for the city, his Tesla pulling out of the driveway while it was still dark. The cleaning service would not arrive until 9. For these 2 hours, the enormous house felt almost cozy, almost hers. Her phone buzzed on the marble counter. Maggie. "Good morning, Your Honor," Caroline said, smiling. "I'm not a judge, Carrie. I'm a divorce attorney. Very different energy. Same bossy voice." Her sister Maggie Brennan was 3 years older, lived in Hartford, and had built one of the most respected family law practices in the state. Through a combination of fierce intelligence and the kind of direct honesty that made some people uncomfortable and made her clients feel safe. "I'm calling because I had a dream about you," Maggie said. "You were in a big house all by yourself, and the doors were locked from the outside. Very on the nose. My subconscious has no subtlety." "I'm fine, Maggie. I know you're fine. You're always fine. That's what worries me." There was a pause, and then Maggie's voice shifted into the tone Caroline recognized as her professional voice, leaking into personal conversation. "Hey, random question. Do you have your own bank account? Not a joint account. Something in your name only. Maggie, I'm serious. Separate from anything Grant has access to. We have a joint account. It has plenty of money in it. I don't need..." "Carrie, listen to me. I'm a divorce lawyer. I've sat across from hundreds of women, and do you know what every single one of them has in common? The ones who come in unprepared, I mean. They all say the same thing. They say, 'We had a joint account. He handled the finances. I didn't think I needed my own money.' And then they're sitting in my office with nothing. I'm not going to be sitting in your office. No one thinks they will. Just promise me you'll open a separate savings account. Put a little in it every month. Not because anything is wrong. Because being smart is not the same as being suspicious. Caroline poured her coffee and added cream. You really can't turn it off, can you? I was born this way. It's a curse. How's my niece? Active. She kicked me so hard last night, I spilled water all over the bed. That's my girl, already causing trouble. They talked for another 10 minutes about Maggie's upcoming case and whether their father would be difficult at Thanksgiving and the new Italian restaurant in Hartford that Maggie said made the best carbonara outside of Rome, which was a bold claim for a woman who had never been to Rome. After they hung up, Carolyn stood alone in the big kitchen and drank her coffee slowly. The house was very quiet. The baby shifted inside her, and she put one hand on her belly, and she thought about what Maggie had said about the bank account. She thought about it for almost a full minute. Then she rinsed her cup and went upstairs to work on the nursery, and she did not think about it again for a long time. That was her first mistake. The signs were there if you knew how to look. And the problem was that Caroline did know how to look. She simply chose not to. Grant had always been a man of routines. He woke at 5:15, showered for exactly 8 minutes, dressed in the walk-in closet that was larger than the apartment Caroline had lived in during nursing school, and left the house by 6. He returned between 7 and 8 in the evening, sometimes later, if there was a client dinner or a closing. But over the past 2 months, the routine had shifted. The changes were small. The kind of small that is easy to explain away individually, but impossible to ignore when you line them all up. He had started going to the gym at 5 in the morning, which meant waking at 4:30, which meant he was dressed and gone before Caroline opened her eyes. He had never cared about the gym before. He played tennis on weekends and called it sufficient. His phone was always face down on surfaces now. He used to toss its screen up on the kitchen counter while he poured a drink. And sometimes she would see texts from his business partner or his mother scroll across the notification bar. Now the phone lived face down, and when it buzzed, he picked it up immediately and tilted the screen away from her. A gesture so natural, it almost seemed unconscious. He smelled different. Not dramatically, not like another woman's perfume, which would have been obvious and almost merciful in its clarity. He smelled like a new cologne, something sharp and modern that was not the Tom Ford she had bought him every Christmas since they started dating. When she mentioned it, he said the store had been out of his usual and he had tried something new. He said this without looking up from his laptop, which told her nothing and everything. And then there was the anniversary. Their 6th wedding anniversary fell on a Thursday in mid-October. Caroline had been planning for it quietly for weeks. She had ordered beef Wellington from the specialty butcher in Greenwich, because it was what they had eaten on their first date at that tiny restaurant in the West Village, the one with the exposed brick and the candles jammed into wine bottles, the one that closed 2 years ago like so many good things. She set the dining room table with the wedding china. She lit candles. She wore the pale blue dress from their honeymoon dinner in Santorini. The one Grant had said made her look like she had been painted by someone who understood beauty. She had to leave it unzipped in the back because of the pregnancy, but from the front, it still looked the same. She was ready at 7. At 8, she texted him, "Dinner is ready whenever you get here. Drive safe." At 9, he replied, "Running late. Don't wait up." She waited. The candles burned down through their first inch, then their second. The beef Wellington went from perfect to warm to room temperature. She ate a small portion alone at the long dining table, then covered his plate in foil and put it in the refrigerator. At 10:30, she moved to the living room and tried to read. The words swam on the page. The baby kicked, and she put her hand on her belly and talked to her the way she had started doing when the house felt too quiet. "Your daddy's working late," she said. "He works a lot, but he's building things, important things. That's what he says." At 11:47, headlights swept across the living room curtains. She heard the garage door, his footsteps in the mudroom. Grant walked into the living room, loosening his tie. He looked polished and slightly flushed, the way a person looks after a glass of wine and good conversation. He saw her on the couch. "Hey," he said, "you're still up." She looked at him and decided to give him the chance. "Do you know what today is?" He stopped. His face did a rapid series of calculations, and she watched every one of them, and the answer he arrived at was written in the slight widening of his eyes. "Oh," he said, "was that tonight?" She did not cry. She wanted to, and the wanting to was almost worse than the crying would have been, because it sat in her chest like a stone, and she had to breathe around it. "I made beef Wellington," she said. "Carrie, I'm sorry. The Halverson closing ran late, and then there was a client dinner I couldn't get out of. You know how these things go." She nodded. She did know how these things went. That was the problem. She knew exactly how these things went, and she was beginning to understand that the things she knew and the things she told herself were two very different landscapes. "It's in the fridge," she said. "You can heat it up." She went upstairs. She brushed her teeth. She got into bed. She lay in the dark with her hands on her belly and listened to the baby's heartbeat through her own body, and she did not sleep for a very long time. The next morning, she found the receipt. It was in the inside pocket of the suit jacket he had worn the night before, the one he had draped over the back of the kitchen chair instead of hanging up, which was unusual because Grant was meticulous about his clothes. She was gathering it up to take to the dry cleaner when the slim piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. La Grenouille, 2 covers, a pre-fixed dinner, a bottle of wine listed at $940. The date was last night, their anniversary. Caroline stood in the kitchen holding this small piece of paper, and the stone in her chest from the night before cracked open, and what was inside it was not sadness, it was knowledge. The cold, clear, terrible knowledge of a woman who has been looking away from the truth and has just been forced to look directly at it. He had been at dinner, a $900 dinner for 2, on their anniversary, while she sat at their dining room table with beef Wellington going cold and candles burning down to nothing. She put the receipt back in the pocket. She took the jacket to the dry cleaner. She went to her OB appointment. She bought groceries. She assembled 3 more pieces of the nursery furniture that Grant had promised to help with. She told herself there was an explanation. There was, of course, an explanation. It was just not the one she wanted. 2 weeks passed, and Caroline became a detective in her own home. She did not plan this. She did not wake up one morning and decide to start investigating her husband. It was more like a door had been opened in her mind that she could not close, and through that door, she could see things she had been trained by love and habit not to notice. She noticed that Grant's gym bag, which used to live in the mudroom, now traveled with him everywhere, including into his home office, which he locked when he left it. She noticed that he had changed the password on his laptop. It used to be their wedding date. She tried it one evening while he was in the shower, and the screen rejected it 3 times. She noticed that he took phone calls on the back patio even when it was 40 degrees outside, and that when he came back in, his face had a particular expression that she could only describe as the expression of a man who has just been somewhere pleasant and is now returning to somewhere ordinary. And she noticed the second phone. It was a Wednesday morning, early November. Grant had left for the gym at 4:30 as usual. His gym bag was sitting in the mudroom where he had dropped it the night before, which was unusual. He normally took it with him to the gym. Perhaps he had been in a rush. Perhaps he had forgotten. Caroline stood over the bag for a full minute, her bare feet cold on the tile floor, her heart beating in a way that felt too fast for someone standing still. She knew that opening this bag would change something. She did not know exactly what, but she understood, with the bone-deep intuition that pregnant women sometimes develop, that whatever was inside this bag would redraw the map of her life. She unzipped it. Under the gym clothes and the protein shaker and the wireless earbuds, there was a phone. It was not Grant's phone. His phone was the latest model in a black case. This phone was older, in a plain dark blue case, the kind of disposable prepaid phone you could buy at any convenience store. She picked it up. The screen was locked, but as she held it, a text notification slid across the display. "Last night was incredible. I can still feel you." And then a single initial. S. Caroline's hands began to shake so violently that she almost dropped the phone. She read the message twice, 3 times, 4 times, as though reading it again might change the words, might rearrange them into something innocent, something that could be explained away with the same logic she had been using to explain everything else. It could not be rearranged. She put the phone back exactly as she had found it. She zipped the bag. She stood up. The baby kicked her hard, right beneath her ribs, and she gasped and put both hands on her belly and bent forward slightly, and for a moment she was not sure if the pain was from the kick or from something else entirely. She walked to the kitchen. She sat at the counter. She picked up her phone and called Maggie. Her sister answered on the second ring with the alertness of someone who is accustomed to receiving emergency calls. "What's wrong?" "I found a phone," Caroline said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat and distant, as though it belonged to someone standing in another room. "A second phone, in his gym bag. There was a text from someone signed S. It said..." She closed her eyes. "It said, 'Last night was incredible. I can still feel you.'" Silence on the line, then Maggie's voice. Very calm, very controlled, the voice she used in depositions. "Where is Grant now?" "The gym." "Where's the phone?" "I put it back." "Good. That was exactly right. Do not touch it again. Do not confront him. Do not mention this to anyone except me. Can you get to my office today, Maggie? Maybe it's not Carrie." Her sister's voice was gentle, but immovable. "You know what that message means. You don't need me to tell you." Caroline sat in the kitchen of her beautiful house and felt the world tilt beneath her like a ship taking on water. She put one hand on the counter to steady herself. The baby moved, and she realized she was crying silently, the tears running down her face and dropping onto the marble surface. "I can't come to your office," she said. "He'll notice. He monitors the joint credit card. He'll see the toll charges to Hartford." Maggie paused. "He monitors your spending?" "He says it's for tax purposes." Another pause, longer this time. "Carrie, listen to me carefully. I want you to..." But that evening, Grant came home with flowers. Not just any flowers. White peonies, her favorites. A bouquet so large he could barely hold it with one arm. He walked into the living room where she was sitting with a book she was not reading, and he put the flowers on the coffee table and got down on his knees in front of her and placed both hands on her belly with a tenderness that felt so real she almost could not breathe. "I know I've been terrible," he said. His eyes were glistening. His voice cracked on the word terrible. "I know I've been absent. I know you've been doing all of this alone. The nursery, the appointments, all of it. And I'm sorry, Carrie. I am so sorry." She looked at his face. This face she had loved since she was 26 years old. This face she had chosen over every other face in the world. This baby deserves better, he said. You deserve better. Give me a chance to prove it. Please. And because hope is the most stubborn thing inside a human heart, because the alternative was too enormous and too frightening to face while pregnant and alone, and in love with a man who was kneeling in front of her with tears in his eyes, Caroline Mitchell chose to believe him. She put her hands over his hands on her belly, and she said, "Okay." That was her second mistake. For 2 weeks, Grant Mitchell was the man Caroline had married. He came home by 6:30 every evening. He cooked dinner twice, badly but earnestly, burning the garlic both times and setting off the smoke detector once, which made Caroline laugh so hard she had to sit down. He went to her OB appointment and held her hand during the ultrasound, and when the technician pointed out the baby's spine on the monitor, his eyes filled with tears that looked genuine because they were. That was the cruelest part. The tears were real. The love was not absent. It was simply not enough to compete with whatever else was living inside him. And Caroline did not know that yet. He rubbed her feet while they watched television. He brought her decaf coffee in bed on Saturday morning. He booked a weekend trip to Vermont, a bed and breakfast near Stowe that a colleague's wife had recommended. And when he told her about it over dinner, his face had the particular brightness of a man who believes he can outrun the consequences of his own choices. A baby moon, he said, before everything gets crazy. Caroline smiled. Everything is already crazy. Then a calm before the crazy. Just us. No phones, no emails, no work. She wanted to believe this so badly that the wanting became a physical sensation, a warmth spreading through her chest like the first sip of tea on a cold morning. She called Maggie and told her. He's really trying, she said. The flowers, the appointments, now Vermont. I think the phone thing, maybe it was nothing. Maybe I misread it. Maggie was quiet for a long time, long enough that Caroline heard the clock ticking on Maggie's office wall. You didn't misread it, Maggie said finally. But I hear you. Just promise me one thing. What? Open that bank account. If he's really changed, it won't matter. If he hasn't, it'll matter more than you can imagine. Maggie, promise me? Fine, I promise. She did not open the account. The Vermont weekend was beautiful. The bed and breakfast was a converted farmhouse with wide plank floors and quilts on the beds and a fireplace in the common room that smelled like birchwood and cinnamon. They walked through a covered bridge in the afternoon light. They bought apple cider donuts at a farm stand and ate them in the car with powdered sugar on their fingers. Grant held her hand in public, which he had not done in months, and something about the simple weight of his palm against hers made her feel anchored in a way she had been missing. That night, they sat on the porch of the farmhouse, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars appear one by one over the green mountains, and Grant said, I want to name her Lily. Lily? Caroline turned to look at him. After my grandmother, she was the only person in my family who was completely kind. No agenda, no conditions, just kind. Caroline felt something shift in her chest. Lily Mitchell, she said, trying the name. It felt right. It felt like the beginning of something. She fell asleep in the car on the drive home, her hand resting on her belly, her head against the window. She felt safe for the first time in weeks. The fear she had been carrying since the phone, since the receipt, since the nights alone at the dining room table, it was still there. But it had gone quiet, like a voice calling from a room she had closed the door to. She woke up because the car had stopped. They were at a gas station somewhere on Interstate 91. The dashboard clock said 1:14 in the morning. Grant was not in the driver's seat. She sat up and looked through the windshield. He was standing 20 feet away, near the air pump, his back to the car, his phone pressed to his ear, not the regular phone. The conversation was animated, his free hand gesturing, his body language tight and private, the posture of a man talking to someone he did not want overheard. Caroline watched him for 15 seconds. He did not know she was awake. In those 15 seconds, she saw his face and profile, illuminated by the gas station fluorescence, and the expression on it was not the expression of a man dealing with a work emergency. It was tender. It was intimate. It was the expression he had worn 2 hours ago when he suggested the name Lily. He turned and saw her watching through the windshield. He hung up immediately, walked back to the car, got in, smiled. "Work emergency," he said. "The Singapore team doesn't understand time zones." He started the car. She said nothing. She looked out the window at the dark highway and felt the door she had closed swing open again, and the voice on the other side was louder than before, and it was saying the thing she did not want to hear. She was still looking out the window when they pulled into the driveway at home, and Grant reached over and squeezed her hand and said, "That was a perfect weekend." "It was," she said. She went inside and lay awake until dawn. She decided to go to his office on a Monday. The decision was not dramatic. There was no moment of steeling herself in the mirror, no tearful resolve. She simply woke up that morning and knew with the calm certainty of a woman who has finished negotiating with herself that she needed to see the truth with her own eyes. Everything else, the phone, the receipt, the gas station call, was evidence. But it was evidence she could argue with. She needed something she could not argue with. She made lunch. Turkey and avocado on sourdough, the sandwich he had loved since college. She packed it in a brown bag with a napkin and a bottle of sparkling water and a cookie from the bakery in town, and she drove to Manhattan. The Mitchell Pinnacle Group occupied floors 38 through 41 of a glass tower in Midtown. Caroline had been there many times for holiday parties and investor dinners, always on Grant's arm, always in a dress he had chosen, always performing the role of the billionaire's wife, with the particular smile that says, "I am happy to be here," without saying anything else. Today she was wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater stretched over her 7-month belly, and she was carrying a brown paper bag, and she looked like exactly what she was, a pregnant woman bringing her husband lunch. The receptionist on the 40th floor was a young woman named Becca, who had always been friendly. Today, Becca's face did something complicated when she saw Caroline step off the elevator. "Mrs. Mitchell, hi. Mr. Mitchell is in a meeting right now. Let me call up and I'll surprise him," Caroline said, smiling. "Just dropping off lunch." Becca opened her mouth and then closed it. The hesitation was small, but Caroline caught it the way you catch a bird moving in your peripheral vision. It was the hesitation of someone who knows something you do not and is deciding in real time whether to protect you from it. "Of course," Becca said. "You know the way." Carolyn walked down the corridor toward Grant's corner office. The hallway was long, lined with glass-walled conference rooms and framed photographs of Mitchell Pinnacle developments. She passed the executive kitchen where she could smell fresh coffee. She passed Jake Holloway's office, the door closed. She passed the small lounge area where Grant's executive team sometimes gathered for informal meetings. Grant's office door was at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar. She heard laughter first. A woman's laughter, low and confident, the kind of laugh that is performed as much as felt. Then Grant's voice, also low, The particular register he used when he was being charming, which was always, but this was a specific kind of charming, an intimate kind. Caroline stopped walking. She stood in the corridor holding the brown paper bag with the turkey sandwich inside it, and she listened, and every cell in her body told her to turn around, to walk back to the elevator, to take the sandwich home and eat it herself and continue the careful architecture of not knowing. She pushed the door open. Grant was sitting on the edge of his desk. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled to the forearms, and he was leaning back slightly in the posture of a man who is comfortable and wants the person in front of him to know it. The woman standing in front of him was tall, blonde. She wore a black dress that fit like it had been sewn onto her body, and heels that put her at eye level with Grant's 6-foot frame. She was standing close to him, very close. Her hand was on his chest, her fingers spread against his shirt, and they were both leaning in, their faces close enough to share breath. They turned when the door opened. Grant's face went through a sequence of expressions so rapid, it was like watching someone flip through television channels. Surprise, fear, calculation, and then the one he settled on, a careful, manufactured calm. The woman did not flinch. She looked at Caroline with the unhurried assessment of someone examining a painting in a gallery. Her eyes moving from Caroline's face to her belly, to the paper bag in her hand and back to her face. And then she smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was not an apologetic smile. It was the smile of a woman who has been waiting for this moment and is pleased to discover it is exactly as satisfying as she imagined. "You must be Caroline," she said. Her voice was smooth and rich, like something expensive being poured. "I'm Sloane. I've heard so much about you." The brown paper bag slipped from Caroline's hand. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud, and the sparkling water bottle rolled out and came to rest against the leg of Grant's desk. Grant stood up from the desk. "Carrie, this isn't... Don't." The word came out of her like a reflex, the same way your hand pulls back from something hot before your brain registers the burn. "Don't you dare say it isn't what it looks like." Sloane watched this exchange with her arms folded, her weight on one hip, the smile still in place. She looked like a woman watching a scene she had rehearsed in her mind many times. Caroline turned and walked to the elevator. She did not run. Running would have given them something to react to, something dramatic they could retell later, with appropriate concern in their voices. She walked with the measured steps of a woman holding herself together through sheer force of will, because she knew that if she stopped, if she let even one crack open, she would collapse on this corporate carpet, and she would not be able to get up. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. She pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. In the polished steel reflection of the elevator walls, she saw herself, pregnant, alone, holding nothing. The turkey sandwich was still on Grant's office floor. She put both hands against the elevator wall and breathed, in and out, in and out. The baby shifted, and she said to her, very quietly, "It's okay. It's going to be okay." She did not believe it, but she said it anyway, because sometimes the saying is the first step toward the believing, and right now it was the only step she could take. She drove to Maggie's apartment in Hartford. She did not remember the drive later. She remembered getting on the highway, and she remembered pulling into Maggie's parking lot, and the 60 minutes between those 2 points were simply gone, erased by a grief so enormous it consumed everything around it like a fire consuming oxygen. Maggie opened the door and saw her face and said nothing. She simply stepped aside and let Caroline walk in, and then she closed the door and guided her to the couch and sat beside her and waited Caroline cried. She cried in a way she had not cried since their mother died 4 years ago. Not elegant tears, not the photogenic sadness of movies. This was ugly crying, the kind that comes from the deepest part of a person, the kind that shakes your whole body and makes sounds that do not sound human. She cried for 20 minutes while Maggie held her, one hand on her back, rubbing slow circles the way their mother used to when they were children. When it slowed, Maggie got up without a word, made tea, set it on the coffee table, and sat back down. "Tell me everything," she said. Caroline told her, the receipt, the phone, the gas station, the office, Sloane's smile. The way she said heard so much about you, as though Caroline were a character in a story, rather than a person, standing in front of her. Maggie listened without interrupting. When Caroline finished, Maggie took a breath and her face changed. The sister disappeared. The attorney arrived. "Okay," Maggie said, "now we fight. And I need you to hear me, Carrie, because everything I'm about to say matters. First, we document everything. The phone, the texts, the receipt, what you saw today. I need dates, times, every detail you can remember. Write it down tonight. Maggie? Second, you are opening a bank account in your name tomorrow. Not next week, tomorrow. I'll go with you. We're putting money in it. He'll notice. He watches the joint account. Then we'll fund it differently. I'll transfer money to you as a loan. We'll document it properly. I can't take your money. You're not taking it. You're borrowing it. And I promise you, Carrie, after this divorce, you'll be able to pay me back 100 times over." Caroline wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Maybe I should just talk to him. Maybe we can—" "No. Third, you do not leave that house. In Connecticut, if you leave the marital home, it can complicate custody and property claims. You stay. He can leave, but you stay. Custody?" The word hit her like a physical blow. I know. But we have to think about this now. And fourth, you do not speak to Grant without me present. From this moment on, I am not your sister. I am your attorney. She reached across the couch and took both of Caroline's hands. But when this is over, and it will be over, I'll be your sister again. And I will be the proudest sister in the state of Connecticut. Caroline looked at her through swollen eyes. "When did you get so tough?" "I was always tough. You were always kind. That's why we make a good team." Maggie paused, then added, "Also, I should tell you something about Sloane Prescott. You know who she is?" "I recognized the name when you said it. Sloane Prescott. Her father is Charles Prescott. He runs Prescott Capital Partners, one of the biggest private equity firms on the East Coast. If she's involved with Grant, this might be more than an affair." "What do you mean?" "I mean Grant's company has been in the news. Rumors of cash flow problems. A big development deal that went sideways." Maggie's eyes were sharp. "I mean, sometimes a billionaire doesn't cheat because he's bored. Sometimes he cheats because the woman comes with an $80 million investment attached." Carolyn stared at her. The room tilted slightly. "I'm going to look into this," Maggie said. "And I need you to be brave, Carrie. Braver than you think you can be. Can you do that?" Caroline put her hands on her belly. The baby kicked, hard, right against her palm, as though offering her own answer. "I can do that," she said. Grant's counterattack came faster than either of them expected. He did not call Caroline that night with apologies or explanations. He called her with a strategy, and the precision of it told her everything about how long he had been preparing for this moment. "I think we should talk," he said, his voice measured and calm, the voice of a man leading a board meeting. "What you saw today was not what you think. Sloane is a colleague. She's physically demonstrative. I should have set better boundaries, and I'm sorry for that. But I need you to understand that your hormones and the stress of the pregnancy are making you interpret things in the worst possible light. Caroline held the phone and listened, and she recognized what he was doing because she had been living inside it for years without knowing its name. He was not explaining, he was rewriting. He was taking her reality, the things she had seen with her own eyes, and reshaping it until it fit inside a version of events where he was reasonable and she was unwell. Maggie was sitting beside her, listening on speakerphone. She wrote on a notepad in large letters and held it up. "He is lying. You saw what you saw." Carolyn said nothing to Grant. She let him talk. She let him explain and rearrange and minimize. And when he was finished, she said, "Good night, Grant," and hung up. Then Grant brought in Helen. His mother called the next morning, her voice warm and concerned, the particular warmth of a woman who has been managing difficult situations with grace for 40 years and has perfected the art of making threats sound like kindness. "Caroline, darling, Grant told me you've been under a lot of stress. I'm worried about you." She paused. "I'd love to take you to lunch. Just us girls." They met at the Greenwich Country Club. Helen Mitchell was elegant in a cream blazer and pearls, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture the posture of a woman who has never been uncertain about anything in her life. She ordered for both of them, without asking, lobster bisque and a Cobb salad, and she waited until the waiter left before she leaned forward. "Sweetheart, I know my son can be difficult. All Mitchell men are. His father was the same way. But marriages survive these things. Good marriages, strong marriages, they survive because the women in them understand something important." She stirred her bisque with delicate precision. "The important thing is the family. The baby. The name." She looked up, and her eyes were steady and clear. "If you make this public, if you involve outside attorneys, I want you to understand something. The Mitchell family has resources that are considerable. We will protect our name. We will protect our grandchild. And we will do whatever is necessary to ensure that child grows up in a stable home." She reached across the table and patted Caroline's hand. "Do you understand what I'm saying, dear?" Caroline understood perfectly. She was being told, in the gentle language of the upper class, that if she fought, she would be destroyed. She drove home from that lunch and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the house she had decorated, and the hydrangeas she had planted, and the life she had built around a man who was now using his own mother as a weapon against her. Then came the custody letter. Grant's attorney, a partner at one of the largest firms in New York, sent Maggie a formal letter stating that if divorce proceedings were initiated, Grant Mitchell would seek primary custody of the unborn child on the grounds that Caroline Mitchell demonstrated a pattern of emotional instability, citing her documented history of anxiety and depression during fertility treatments, statements from associates who observed erratic behavior, and concerns about her ability to provide a stable environment. Maggie read the letter, and her face went white with fury. "He's been building a case," she said. Her voice was quiet, which was more frightening than shouting. "This wasn't reactive, Carrie. He's been preparing for this. The medical records, the witnesses. He started gathering this long before you found that phone." The words hit Caroline like a series of physical blows. Not just that he was cheating, not just that he was planning to leave, but that he had been systematically constructing a case to take her child while she was at home, assembling the nursery furniture by herself and making his favorite dinner, and choosing to believe his lies because the truth was too terrible to hold. She sat on the bathroom floor because it was the only room with a lock on the door. She was 7 months pregnant, and her back ached and the tile was cold under her legs, and she could not stop shaking. "What if he takes my baby?" she whispered into the phone. Maggie's voice came through the speaker immediately, fierce and absolute. Over my dead body. Do you hear me? Over my dead body. The call from Jake Holloway came on a Thursday morning. Caroline did not recognize the number. She almost did not answer, because unknown numbers had become a source of anxiety. Grant's attorney, Helen's assistant, various people she did not want to speak to, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Mitchell. The voice was male, tired, familiar in the way that voices you have heard at dinner parties and holiday gatherings are familiar without being intimate. This is Jake Holloway, Grant's CFO. I need to talk to you, and I need you to not tell Grant about this call. They met at a diner in Norwalk, 30 minutes from Greenwich, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that came in heavy ceramic mugs. Jake was sitting in the back booth when she arrived. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not been sleeping for some time. "Thank you for coming," he said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug as though it were the only warm thing left in the world. "I've been going back and forth about this for weeks, whether to call you, whether it was my place. What is this about, Jake?" He took a breath. "Sloane Prescott isn't just an affair. She's a transaction." And then he told her everything. 6 months ago, Mitchell Pinnacle had been on the edge of collapse. A massive development project in Hudson Yards had gone catastrophically over budget. Subcontractors were threatening lawsuits. Banks were pulling lines of credit. Grant needed $80 million in emergency capital, or the company would go under, and going under would mean not just bankruptcy, but criminal exposure. There were financial irregularities that Grant's accounting team had been covering. Charles Prescott's firm had the capital. Charles Prescott also had a daughter who had been pursuing Grant at industry events for over a year. Grant made the calculation. He began the affair with Sloane. Within weeks, Charles Prescott invested $80 million into Mitchell Pinnacle. In return, Grant made promises. He would divorce Caroline after the baby was born. He would marry Sloane. The Mitchell and Prescott families would merge their interests. He was going to wait until the baby came, Jake said, staring into his coffee. He wanted to be able to tell the court he tried. The reconciliation, the flowers, Vermont, that was all theater. He was building a narrative for the custody case. Devoted husband tries to save marriage. Unstable wife refuses to cooperate. Caroline felt the diner tilt around her. The baby shifted, pressing against her ribs, and she put one hand on the table to steady herself. "The custody threats aren't a reaction to you finding out," Jake continued. "They were the original plan. He was always going to fight for primary custody. Sloane's father insisted on it. He wants his grandchildren, the Mitchell heir, raised in what he calls the right environment." "Why are you telling me this?" Caroline asked. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. Inside, she was falling, but her voice was steady. Jake looked up from his coffee. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Because I have a daughter. She's 4. Her name is Emma. And if someone did this to her in 20 years, if some man sat in a boardroom and planned the systematic destruction of her life like it was a quarterly report, I would want someone to tell her the truth." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "These are financial records. Offshore accounts Grant set up in the Caymans. Shell companies. He's been moving marital assets for over 2 years. There's a Swiss account with $34 million in it that Caroline, that you, have no idea exists." She took the folder. It was heavy. "And there's something else," Jake said. "He's been paying Sloane over $6 million in consulting fees routed through a company she owns. Your money, Caroline. He's been paying his mistress with your money." Caroline sat in the vinyl booth of the diner in Norwalk, Connecticut, holding a folder full of evidence that her husband had not just betrayed her, but had engineered her destruction with the same precision he used to develop luxury condominiums. She thought about the beef, Wellington. She thought about the candles burning down. She thought about the way he had put his hands on her belly and said, "Give me a chance," and how she had believed him because she loved him, and how that love had been a tool he used against her the way a locksmith uses a pick. She did not cry. Something in her had moved past crying. It had moved into a place that was cold and clear and absolutely certain. "Thank you, Jake," she said. She put the folder in her bag. She stood up and left money on the table for her coffee. She called Maggie from the car. "File everything," she said. "All of it. I want it public." "Are you sure?" "He was planning to take my daughter. He was paying his mistress with my money. He turned his own mother into a weapon. And he did it all, while rubbing my feet and pretending to cry at our baby's ultrasound." She paused. "I'm sure." "Then let's go to war," Maggie said. Maggie went nuclear, and when Maggie went nuclear, the fallout was spectacular. She filed an emergency motion for exclusive possession of the marital home, arguing that Grant's documented deception and the financial manipulation created an environment of psychological harm for a high-risk pregnancy. The judge, a woman named Patricia Reeves, who had seen every kind of domestic betrayal in her 30 years on the bench, reviewed the evidence, looked at Grant's attorney over the top of her reading glasses, and granted the motion within 48 hours. Grant was ordered to vacate the Greenwich estate. He moved into the Manhattan apartment where Sloane had cracked her head on the bathroom marble, which was fitting in a way that neither of them appreciated. Maggie subpoenaed Mitchell Pinnacle's financial records. She contacted Charles Prescott's firm directly and informed them, with the particular calm of an attorney holding a winning hand, that their $80 million investment might be entangled in fraud, since Grant had used marital assets as collateral without his spouse's knowledge or consent, which in Connecticut required spousal notification. Charles Prescott did not become a billionaire by ignoring legal threats. He froze the investment pending review. Mitchell Pinnacle's stock dropped 15% in a single trading day. The Wall Street Journal ran an item about leadership instability at the firm. Grant's board of directors requested an emergency meeting. For 1 week, it worked. Caroline sat in her house, with the nursery finally finished and the hydrangeas dormant in the autumn cold, and her daughter kicking steadily inside her, and she felt something she had not felt in months. She felt powerful. She was eating ice cream on the couch, watching Grant's stock price continue its descent on the financial news channel, and she said to her belly, "Your father's net worth just dropped $40 million. Don't worry, you won't remember any of this, but Mommy will." Then everything went wrong at once. It started with the phone call from her OB. Her latest blood work was alarming. Her blood pressure, which had been elevated for weeks, had crossed into dangerous territory. The diagnosis was severe preeclampsia, and the doctor's voice carried the particular weight of a medical professional who needs a patient to understand the gravity of what is being said. "Mrs. Mitchell, if your blood pressure doesn't come down, we may need to deliver this baby early. At 30 weeks, that carries significant risks. I need you to understand that this is serious. You need to reduce stress immediately." Caroline hung up and sat in the nursery she had built by herself, surrounded by tiny clothes in soft pinks and whites, folded neatly in dresser drawers, waiting for a baby who might have to arrive too soon into a world that had become too hostile. She put her hand on her belly. "Not yet," she whispered. "Stay in there a little longer. I know it's loud out here. I know everything is scary, But stay in there. I'll make it better. I promise." Then, on a Tuesday night at 11 o'clock, she began to feel dizzy. Her vision blurred at the edges. She tried to call Maggie, but her phone went to voicemail. She drove herself to Greenwich Hospital, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, breathing through the waves of lightheadedness, talking to the baby the entire way. Dr. Thomas Whitfield was on duty. They had been friends in college, years ago, before she married Grant, and moved into a world that did not include old friends from ordinary lives. He was kind and competent, and his face when he saw her blood pressure reading told her everything his words were trying to soften. "Carrie, your pressure is 180 over 110. This is severe. We need to stabilize you right now, and if it doesn't come down in the next hour, we're looking at an emergency delivery tonight." She lay in the hospital bed, with monitors beeping around her, and an IV in her arm, and the baby moving restlessly inside her, as though she could sense the urgency. And Caroline was more afraid than she had ever been in her life, not for herself, for Lily. Then the ER doors burst open, and Grant arrived, carrying Sloane, and everything she thought she knew about the limits of pain expanded to include new territory she had not known existed. The baby came at 2:17 in the morning. She was born by emergency surgery, 8 weeks early, in an operating room that smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline, while Grant Mitchell stood in a hospital corridor between two rooms, trying to decide which direction his life was supposed to go, which was a decision he should have made a long time ago and never had. Lily Mitchell weighed 4 pounds and 2 ounces. She had a full head of dark hair, impossibly tiny fingers that curled around the edge of her blanket, and a cry that was thin and fierce. The cry of someone small who had decided to arrive in the world on her own terms. She was placed in the NICU in an incubator with a feeding tube and monitors and the careful, constant attention of nurses who knew how to keep fragile things alive. Caroline watched her through the glass and felt something she had never felt before, a love so enormous and so absolute that it rewrote every other feeling she had ever had. The betrayal, the fear, the grief, they were all still there, but they were smaller now, pushed to the margins by this tiny person breathing steadily under warm lights. Maggie arrived at 3 in the morning. She had driven from Hartford at a speed that would have cost her license if any state trooper had been paying attention. She walked into Caroline's room, saw her sister in the hospital bed, with tubes and monitors and a pale, exhausted face, and then looked through the window at the incubator where Lily lay sleeping, and Maggie Brennan, who had maintained her composure through hundreds of brutal depositions and custody battles and divorce proceedings, burst into tears. "She's perfect," Maggie said, pressing her hand against the glass. "She's early," Caroline said, "but she's here. She's a Brennan woman. We always show up early and make an entrance." Caroline laughed, and the laughing hurt her incision, and she did not care. In the days that followed, the truth spread the way truth always does, when it has been contained too long. The ER incident had witnesses, 2 nurses, a security guard. An entire emergency room had watched a billionaire carry his mistress through the same doors where his pregnant wife was in crisis. The story leaked within 24 hours, but the real explosion came from an unexpected source. Helen Mitchell called Maggie and requested a meeting. Maggie went expecting another threat, another display of cashmere-wrapped intimidation. She prepared her sharpest responses. Instead, Helen slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents that Grant's own mother had gathered, financial records showing offshore accounts he had hidden from everyone, including his family. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, art purchases laundered through a gallery in Chelsea, the Swiss account Jake had mentioned, and 3 more that even Jake did not know about. Maggie stared at the folder, then at Helen. Why? Helen's face was stone, but her voice carried the particular fury of a woman whose legacy has been publicly humiliated. Because I told my son that if he embarrassed this family, I would protect the family, not him. He chose to embarrass us. That photograph, my son carrying that woman into the emergency room, while his wife delivered my granddaughter alone, that was in the New York Post. My bridge club saw it. My pastor saw it. The women I have known for 40 years looked at me with pity, and I have never been pitied in my life. She straightened her pearls with a precision that was almost military. I have survived 3 recessions, a husband with a wandering eye and a bout with cancer. I will not survive being pitied at the Greenwich Country Club. Maggie looked at the folder, then at Helen, and said, Mrs. Mitchell, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful and terrifying friendship. The divorce proceedings became a controlled demolition. With Helen's documents, Jake's testimony, the offshore accounts, the $6 million in payments to Sloan, and the ER incident, Grant's legal position collapsed. His custody claim was destroyed when the judge noted that he had been with his mistress during his wife's medical emergency. His financial deception was entered into evidence in its entirety. Charles Prescott, publicly humiliated by the revelation that his daughter had been a paid participant in an orchestrated affair, withdrew his investment entirely and filed his own lawsuit against Mitchell Pinnacle for misrepresentation. Grant tried one last move. He came to the NICU. He stood at the window, looking at Lily in her incubator, this impossibly small person with dark hair and perfect fingers breathing through a tube, and he waited for Caroline. When she arrived, he said, I never wanted this. Which part? She asked. The affair? The theft? The lies? Or the getting caught? I love my daughter. Caroline looked at him. She looked at this man she had married and loved and believed in and been destroyed by, and she felt something she did not expect. Not rage, not grief, something closer to clarity. The particular clarity that comes after a long illness breaks, when the fever drops and the world comes back into focus. Then love her enough to let her grow up, seeing her mother treated with respect, she said. Sign the agreement, give me what I'm owed, and be a father, a real one, when she's old enough to know the difference. He signed. 6 months later, the Mitchell estate in Greenwich looked different than it had a year ago. Not because anything physical had changed. The hydrangeas were blooming again, the way they did every June, blue and purple and endlessly patient. The kitchen still had the heated stone floors. The nursery was finished, finally, and it was occupied now by a baby who had opinions about everything and expressed them at considerable volume. What was different was the feeling of the house. It was lighter. The air moved more freely. The silence, when it came, was peaceful rather than oppressive. It was a house with space for breathing. Caroline had returned to nursing, part-time, at a women's health clinic in Stamford. She had gone back because she needed to work, and not just for the money, though the money mattered. She needed to be a person who did things in the world, who was useful, who had skills that belonged to her and could not be taken away by any man, no matter how rich or how charming. She told Maggie this on a Sunday evening in July. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where Caroline had once waited alone on her anniversary, and they were eating pasta that Caroline had made and drinking wine that Maggie had brought, and Lily was in her high chair investigating a piece of bread with the intense focus of a tiny scientist. The most important thing I learned from all of this, Caroline said, twirling spaghetti around her fork, is that I should never have stopped working. Not just because of money, even though, yes, absolutely, because of money, but because when you give up the thing that makes you who you are, you hand someone else the power to define you, and they will always define you as less than you are. Maggie raised her glass. Say that again louder for every woman in the back. I'm serious, Maggie. Grant told Sloane I was difficult. He told his mother I was unstable. He told his lawyer I was unfit. And you know why those lies almost worked? Because I had no evidence to the contrary. I had no career, no independent finances, no life outside of his. I had made myself so small that when he described me as nothing, it was almost plausible. It was never plausible, Maggie said firmly. Not for 1 second. But it could have been, to a judge who didn't know me, to a court that only saw what Grant's lawyers presented. She looked at Lily, who had abandoned the bread and was now reaching for a piece of pasta with the determination of a mountaineer. I'm never going to let that happen again, and I'm going to make sure she never has to. Caroline had used part of the divorce settlement to establish a fund. It was small but growing, and its purpose was specific: emergency financial support for women leaving marriages who needed immediate resources, money for a security deposit, first month's rent, groceries, legal consultation, the basic infrastructure of a new life that so many women did not have access to when they needed it most. She called it the Lily Fund. Grant saw Lily every other weekend. He was trying. He was not good at it yet. He held her awkwardly, like someone handling an expensive object they were afraid to break. He did not know her schedule, her preferences, the specific way she liked to be held when she was tired, with her head against the left shoulder, never the right. But he showed up. He was present, and Caroline believed cautiously that he might eventually become the father Lily deserved, not because he had changed, but because Lily would change him. Babies had that power. They made you larger than your worst self, if you let them. Sloane Prescott had moved to Miami after her father cut off her funding. The last anyone heard, she was dating a retired hedge fund manager who was twice her age and half as interesting as he believed himself to be. Caroline felt nothing about this. Sloane had been a weapon, not a person, in the architecture of Grant's plan. Hating her would have been like hating a bullet instead of the person who fired it. Helen Mitchell sent a hand-embroidered blanket for Lily's christening. It arrived in a box from Bergdorf's with a card written in Helen's precise, elegant handwriting. It read, "To my granddaughter, be smarter than the men in your family. It will not be difficult." Caroline put the blanket in the crib and laughed for a long time. And then it was Thanksgiving. The house was full. Maggie was there, of course, already on her second glass of wine and telling a story about a client's husband who had tried to hide assets inside a collection of rare baseball cards, which she had discovered and which the judge had not found amusing. Thomas Whitfield was there too. He had been checking on Lily during her NICU stay and then after, and somewhere in all those visits and conversations in hospital corridors and text messages about feeding schedules, something had begun. Caroline did not have a name for it yet. It was too new and too tentative to name. But it was warm, and it was real, and it did not require her to be anyone other than who she was, which was the most remarkable thing about it. Two of Caroline's old nursing friends had reconnected after the story became public. They had reached out not with gossip or pity, but with the simple, powerful words, "We're here. What do you need?" They were at the table now, arguing cheerfully about whether the stuffing recipe but needed more sage. Lily was in her high chair, systematically destroying a sweet potato with the focus and intensity of a person conducting important research. Her face was orange. Her hands were orange. The tray of the high chair was orange. She looked enormously pleased with herself. The table was set beautifully but not perfectly. One of the candles was crooked because Maggie had bumped it during her baseball card story. There was a wine stain on the tablecloth from a gesture that had been slightly too dramatic. The turkey was slightly overdone because Caroline had been giving Lily a bath when the timer went off, and by the time she got back to the kitchen, the bird had crossed the line from golden to ambitious. It did not matter. None of it mattered. It was messy and loud and imperfect and absolutely real. Caroline stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, holding a dish of roasted Brussels sprouts, watching all of it. Maggie arguing about the sage, Thomas laughing, her friends filling their glasses, Lily conducting her sweet potato experiments with the seriousness of a Nobel laureate. A year ago, she had been sitting at this table alone, candles burning down, beef Wellington going cold, waiting for a man who was having a $900 dinner with someone else. Now the table was full. She set down the Brussels sprouts and took her seat. Maggie raised her glass. "To Carrie," she said, "who burned her life down and built a better one." "I didn't burn it down," Caroline said. "He did? I just refused to stay in the ashes." They drank. Lily banged her spoon on the high chair tray with the percussive enthusiasm of a one-woman band. Sweet potato flew in a small arc and landed on Thomas's sleeve. He looked at it, looked at Lily, and said with complete sincerity, "Thank you. I was hoping for some sweet potato on my shirt." Everyone laughed. The candles flickered. The crooked one tilted a little further, and nobody fixed it, because it was fine. Everything was fine, not perfect, not the magazine version of a life, but fine in the way that matters, which is to say, warm and honest, and full of people who showed up. Caroline looked around the table one more time. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, the one who had stood in a corporate office, holding a brown paper bag, watching her world end. She thought about the woman she was now. They were the same person, but they were not. The second woman had been built by the first woman's pain, the way a forest grows back after a fire, different but alive, and sometimes more beautiful for having survived. She picked up her fork. She took a bite of the slightly overdone turkey. It was delicious. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall. It covered the hydrangeas and the stone walkway and the driveway where Grant's car used to sit, and it made everything clean and quiet and new. Caroline Mitchell learned something that year that no one teaches you and everyone needs to know. The opposite of betrayal is not revenge. It is rebuilding. It is the moment you stop asking, "How could he do this to me?" and start asking, "What am I going to do for myself?" It is sweet potato on a baby's face, and a crooked candle, and a sister who drives too fast, and a table full of people who showed up. Not because you were a billionaire's wife, but because you were you, and you were always enough. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with real life lessons. Every word is crafted with intention because we believe storytelling has the power to heal, to inspire, and to remind you that you are never as alone as you feel. Thank you for being here.